Thanks, Angela. I suppose it's ironic to start my remarks by saying that there has been a lack of objectivity and balance in public discourse and discussion on economic matters in Ireland. This particular forum is one of the notable exceptions to that, but there is, and there has been, to our great cost, a herd instinct in the media that was determined to only allow one view to be articulated and therefore to only allow one view to prevail. I won't repeat the embarrassing mantra of the Celtic Tiger years when Charlie McCreevy, cheered on by a fawning media, lectured our international colleagues on how they had all got it wrong and we had discovered the holy grail of onward and upward economic growth. I can understand, and indeed would expect, the Governor of the Central Bank, Patrick Honohan, to have a view on current issues. But that's not enough for him. At the end of June, he told the New York Times, and I quote, "We don't have the flexibility to do a spending stimulus now. There is no one who is even arguing for it." And that is not true. For example, recently a conference was held by the Construction Industry Federation, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and the pensions industry. It was attended by the Department of Finance, and it was designed to explore whether there was a role for pension funds, which have capital available and need investment opportunities that would generate a commercial return. There is some imaginative thinking underway on the basis for and a source for funding for a targeted and sophisticated stimulus package aimed at generating employment, enhancing skills, developing indigenous industry and addressing the major infrastructural deficits such as the appalling mental health facilities, schools, public transport, prison refurbishment, etc. And by the way, it is not possible to have a discussion about the economy without mentioning that Irish pension investments have lost 3.5% since the start of this year. They've lost nearly 9.5% over the last 3 years, and they've only generated a return of 0.2% over the last 10 years. They'd actually have done better by buying prize bonds and pocketing a few winnings over the years. They have underperformed against all international benchmarks, and new investment strategies are necessary. There is a compelling need for fundamental change in the approach of the pensions investment industry, and there is a firm basis for pension funds to be harnessed to provide an economic stimulus in the country. The extremely prudent approach of the Pensions Board is also driving pension scheme investments away from high-risk equities and in the direction of bonds, in the direction of fixed-interest vehicles, and there is an opportunity in that environment for the development of investments with guaranteed rental income from the state in the long run for infrastructure developments like schools, healthcare facilities, nursing homes, roads, rail and broadband. NAMA and the banks, on some estimates, are now likely to cost the taxpayer up to €35 billion. With that figure, I'm actually being generous in assuming that investments in the other financial institutions will eventually be returned to the taxpayer. These catastrophic losses have been estimated as amounting up to €80 per week from each taxpayer over the next few decades. While the debate is now over and irreversible steps and commitments have been implemented, I believe that the application of the guarantee to Anglo and Nationwide was wrong. I believe NAMA was the wrong choice, and letting Anglo and Nationwide fail would have been a better approach, with bondholders and shareholders taking the hit that is intrinsic to the capitalist system. The state would have incurred smaller losses in covering the deposits up to a certain level than the costs that are now envisaged. In this case, those who took the risk and actually enjoyed the substantial benefits over the years have offloaded the price of failure to the general population. But most fundamentally, in all of this economic argument, I believe that Margaret Thatcher's catchphrase, "There is no alternative," shortened to TINA, is the most dangerous deadweight to public discourse and rational thinking in the context of the current crisis. Even Governor Honan's nuanced comments on the value judgments involved at the time of the guarantee have been represented as a ringing endorsement of questionable government decisions. Let's leave aside our incredulity, our rage and our justified need to hold those responsible to account. Let's try to work out the implications of the carnage for the Irish economy. There's four key cornerstones to the Irish commercial economy, and they are indigenous large private companies, the small and medium enterprise, commercial state bodies and the multinationals. Now, the multinationals are generally exempt from the effects of the domestic credit crisis. And SMEs, as Mark Fielding has pointed out, are bearing the brunt of the credit crisis as well as the domestic downturn. Much fanfare has surrounded recent talk of large sums of money being earmarked for lending to the SME sector. I would greatly fear that some or all of this will simply replace existing facilities. The term loans will replace overdrafts, with no additional funding being made available to this sector. And it's a bit like something we're very familiar with in this country, of multiple announcements of the same job creation for the same jobs time and time again. The most fundamental aim for the remaining Irish banks is survival. All we need to do is look at the frantic efforts of Alan Dukes to secure a future role for what we could best describe as Anglo-minor. The primary focus of Bank of Ireland and AIB is to recapitalise and keep as much as possible of their ownership outside the state sector. The only way for them to achieve that is to build up their assets by hoarding capital, by restricting lending and by increasing returns through higher interest rates. We've already seen that creeping through in mortgage rates, and SMEs and other borrowers will find that new or renewed loans and overdrafts will be on more onerous terms. If we look at the profile of large indigenous private companies from a few years ago, sure, we'd have started off with Anglo, AIB, Bank of Ireland, Quinn, and only then moved on to CRH, Kerry and other companies like that. In truth, the Irish indigenous large sector is a mixed bag, and it would be difficult, but it will be essential for our economic development agencies to identify a strategy for growth. We might start actually with indigenous companies that actually make things, whether energy, food or services like tourism or multimedia or technology engineering. In another example of unnecessary outsourcing of policy formation, the government has appointed Colin McCarthy to conduct another review, this time of the commercial semi-state sector. And it's predictable, given where he comes from, that Colin McCarthy will take his usual approach on the matter, and we'll find ourselves shortly in a short-term and self-defeating argument about privatisation, focusing on fiscal considerations instead of jobs and growth. There are many things we have done wrong about the Irish economy, but privatisations are certainly top of the list of failures. If we look at some that I'm familiar with, Eircom has been stripped bare. Even its masts have been sold. It sits on debt of 3.3 billion. It sold the market leader in mobile Aircell to Vodafone and entered the same market as a third-ranking player. It's gone through several sets of owners and managers. Millionaires have become billionaires, and managers have become millionaires. They all made significant returns, but on each and every occasion they left the company weaker. Aer Lingus was sold and ended up in bondage within a week of its privatisation. It has a hostile 29% owner. The government said that couldn't happen, and that owner to date can't take it over, but equally the company can't get rid of them. Its stock market free float was due to be nearly 2/3. It's now less than 30%, and normal company procedures are routinely blocked by Ryanair at AGMs. ICC Bank, ACC Bank and the trustee savings banks have now disappeared into the black hole of our financial meltdown. The pity is that there was an argument at one stage that a state bank lending in to the SME sector was something we thought was a good idea. But the clever people thought we didn't need it anymore, but we need it now. For some years, there's been a growing consensus in support of an Irish Congress of Trade Unions proposal that the commercial semi-state companies should be placed in a holding company. An investment strategy should be subject to commercial decision-making, and profits in one area could support commercial investments and consequential job creation in other companies. While there may be differences over detail, it seems that the broad concept is accepted of leveraging the assets and profits of the sector to generate commercial activity and growth. Opportunities in the green economy and technology spring to mind. The Labour Party and recently Fine Gael have given positive support to the broad approach, and this concept or proposal should be considered by McCarthy, but I fear that ideas proposed by Congress and supported by the main opposition parties do not necessarily recommend themselves to this process. The explicit policy position of Irish policy formers has been to deflate the Irish economy and benefit from the effects of a Keynesian-style economic stimulus elsewhere. Nevertheless, everybody isn't in on that secret. We've been treated to the bizarre public commentary from one former banking, now Irish Times economic commentator, who cheered on the international retreat to economic retrenchment that was criticised by earlier speakers, without realising that this would or will totally undermine our secret economic policy. We need to think again. The failure of the G20 gathering to agree a coherent strategy for the world economy must cause a rethink here. The G20 has agreed that everybody needs to reduce debt and deficits, and everybody needs to export our way out of recession. Everybody can't do that at the same time. Policymakers should listen to Nobel Prize laureate Paul Krugman, who's actually said there's a simple solution to the debt problem. It's called growth. Finally, we need to examine the implications domestically of the fear factor that was shown by Willie's example of us saving 15 billion a year at the moment. The direct consequences of current government strategy are fear and uncertainty about jobs, about income and about the future. As a result, there's a hoarding of cash with savings at record levels at the same time that spending is needed to stimulate. There's a psychological effect from government policy, and this tendency is exaggerated by the pain is good media consensus. Which brings me to where I started off. Consensus is a bad idea. Thank you.